Meantime, the family of an Alice man said to have died during the winter storm blackout believes ERCOT and AEP Texas are to blame. They filed a lawsuit naming the power grid operator and utility company as defendants.
And tonight, our Bill Churchwell spoke with one of the attorneys on the case and has a look at what happens next. It is our top story at 10.
Attorneys for the family of Abelino Guzman say the 44-year-old father literally froze to death inside of his Alice home. This after they say his house remained without power for several days when temperatures dropped to just 17 degrees.
He was there with his partner and his young child, and he started having trouble breathing. His skin was purple.
Patrick Love is part of a legal team of attorneys now representing the family. That team includes Corpus Christi firm Gowan Elizondo. Now, the lawsuit states that on February 16th, Guzman's girlfriend, who is a certified nurse's assistant, began performing CPR on him while calling for an ambulance, which was delayed by road conditions. Love tells me that Guzman died of hypothermia and says something like this never should have happened.
These power companies knew at least as early as 1989 exactly what they needed to do to prevent these sort of outages from happening. And they literally spent decades doing nothing about it.
The lawsuit also states that 4 million Texans, including Guzman, lost power during the winter storm, and that leading up to the storm, ERCOT, AEP, and AEP Texas could have increased electric production capacity, but chose not to do so, leading to the massive blackouts. The plaintiffs are suing for compensation for emotional pain, torment, and anguish on behalf of Guzman's children.
We want a Jim Wells County jury to tell us what it's worth for somebody to freeze to death in their home.
This is not the only lawsuit ERCOT is facing. An 11-year-old boy in Conroe, north of Houston, also reportedly died from hypothermia during the freezing weather and power outages. The boy's family is seeking $100 million. However, according to our news partners at the Texas Tribune, there is a question whether or not ERCOT is protected from lawsuits. The Texas Supreme Court is expected to decide this year whether ERCOT is entitled to sovereign immunity after hearing another case that raised the question last year. As far as the lawsuit filed by Guzman's family, we reached out to both ERCOT and AEP Texas. ERCOT telling 3 News, quote, "We continue to review all lawsuits and have no comment at this time." AEP Texas responded with this statement that said they understand the frustrations and hardships faced by many customers who were affected by the outages from the unprecedented winter weather and the resulting load shed interruptions that were required of AEP Texas by ERCOT, and that they too were unable to comment on any ongoing or pending litigation. Bill Churchwell, 3 News.